Right, we ready? You ready?
Yeah.
Feeling anxious about the camera position?
You notice I've dropped the camera for those watching so that you can see a bit more of the background. I think last time we could just see water, couldn't we?
Yes, might be better than just seeing our ugly mugs. There's always a bit of a stressful few minutes before we start recording. You running around and me saying, oh God, get on with it. But anyway, here we are here. You've done your obligatory glug of coffee straight into your microphone as we start. And actually it's quite pertinent that I was getting stressed because you were taking so long to position the camera, get the lights working and all that nonsense, because this week it is anxiety.
Ooh, I'm scared.
Don't be scared. It's an important topic, and it's a big, huge topic, but just tell everybody why we chose this topic.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Liz.
And I'm Jamie.
Welcome to Follow the Boat, in which we discuss what it's really like to give it all up to live on a boat.
And go travelling around the world. We've been doing it since 2006 and we're still at it.
Each week we talk about our latest YouTube videos.
And about boats, sailing, travel or anything else which floats into our heads.
And if you leave a comment we like, we'll give you an answer and a name check. Peace and fair winds.
You may have noticed in our weekly vlogs, not the podcast, in the vlogs, the current ones that are out at the moment, a significant amount of weight loss on my behalf, and there's a reason for this. And I went through quite a severe bout of anxiety or borderline depression.
Yes, you did.
Which was triggered by, well, there were three triggers, but they happened sort of like 300 mile intervals on this trip from from Borneo down to Lombok.
Yeah.
And I spiraled.
You did. It was very difficult for me to watch because I felt there was very little I could do about it, and I couldn't name it. And it was difficult. Lots of comments about how much weight you were losing without them realising actually it was the mental challenge you were going through. So before we talk about the detail that you went into and start addressing some of the comments, what we do need to think about is anxiety actually getting worse, or has it always been there? And a throwaway remark I made in last week's episode was, it definitely seems to be getting worse after COVID, but I don't really know. So you said, it definitely has. I went away and checked. And this is what I found. In fact, last month, only a couple of weeks ago, the Director General of the World Health Organization did an address about this very subject. I'm not going to read the whole address, we'll be here all day, you can find it online, but what he does say is the COVID-19 pandemic has taken a huge toll on mental health, a toll we are still trying to fully understand. Research commissioned by WHO indicates that during the pandemic, depression and anxiety increased by more than 25%. That is worldwide. So we do know that it is a fact that it is much, much worse. The only thing I would ask is it much worse, or are we just more aware of it? Don't know.
And the other question in relation to my particular situation was how much of the context of being in lockdown contributed in the longer term to my situation.
Yeah, I think probably you and many, many others were already feeling those stresses way before we set out on our huge epic travels. Research commissioned does show that depression and anxiety was bad, but it says that just as employers have a responsibility to protect the physical health of their workers for occupational health and safety risks, they also have a responsibility to support their mental health. Yet this has been neglected, says the World Health Organization. On average, countries spend around 2%, that's all, of their health budget on mental health, and in some countries there are as few as 2 mental health workers for every 100,000 people. And yet mental health conditions are among the leading contributors to the global burden of disease. So social isolation, loneliness, suffering and bereavement, financial worries and fear of the future all contributed to the upsurge in anxiety and depression during COVID.
Can I just stop you here? Because I'm sure there will be some people out there who poo-poo this issue And I just wanted to read one comment, and I'm not picking on this person, because I just wanted to read it because I think it does sum up a lot of people's attitude, and I have to say mine too originally. From SVP, who said, "I'm sure I've experienced anxiety, but one of my peeves is hearing those words out of people's mouths. I'm anxious, I have anxiety. I may be bordering on psychopath, but I just can't empathise with it. It drives me mad. And I just think, oh, get over it already."
Yeah.
And I think this attitude is something I shared as well when you're watching someone else go through.
Just kind of snap out of it. Come on.
Yeah, pull your socks up.
Yeah, a lot of people are in a much worse position than you and all that.
Exactly. And I mean, those who know me know that I'm generally a very confident person, and anxiety is something that I have never had a problem with. And if anything, I mean, there is a bit of positive anxiety you get from putting yourselves in certain situations outside your comfort zone, and I've always thrived on that. So I too shared that kind of attitude, which was, just snap out of it.
Yeah, I've certainly been like that. I am like that to myself, less verbally like that to other people, but I don't feel like that at all anymore, having really looked into it and got to know it and gone through it with you. And I want to say that this is a subject important for everyone, including old people like us who've never had it and think they never will, because there's a very high chance that they will from the research that I've done.
Yes, well, I mean, you only have to talk to my parents, for example. I hope they don't mind me talking about this in public, but they themselves actually only recently said as you get older you become more anxious, and it's something I know your mother went through.
My mother had it terribly. My father didn't, but my mother, I think she suffered without having it named all her life from it.
And I guess when you're younger you have that kind of bravado and that sort of youthful arrogance that carries you through potentially anxiety-ridden situations and just hit it head on. But as you get older and as you become more experienced, and I think this is something that contributed to my anxiety, was actually having more knowledge and understanding of a situation you're in can actually contribute negatively to your mental state of mind, because you're actually more conscious of the things that could go wrong. That comment that I just read out, though, I wanted to counter it with another one from 657 Blue Army, who says, "Anxiety seems to be the disease of the 21st century. I have suffered it for around 35 years. Nobody wants anxiety and depression, so we all have to treat sufferers very gently and be as kind to them as possible, because we don't know what agony they are suffering." And I think that's one of the key takeaways.
I think that's a mantra for life. Always be kind. You don't know what's going on in that person's life, what they may be going through. Just be kind. If you can't be kind, shut up. Don't say anything. But before we go even further into this and start reading the comments in detail and talk about your story, we do just need to outline what anxiety is. And I had to do this by going on the NHS, the National Health Service of the UK website, to get some decent understanding. So what they say is we all have a background level of anxiety. So we all have that level. For some of us it's very low. We're really laid back people and you're not really aware of that you have anxiety very often. It hardly ever appears. For others, they do live in a constant state of slightly alertness and anxiousness, and they worry about things, but that is their way of life. That's the way they live. It only becomes a problem when that changes. So the level that you're normally at suddenly changes. So if you're very laid back and all of a sudden you're really anxious about things, that's anxiety. If you're always on edge and slightly anxious and you get really badly, painfully anxious, then that's when you've got to start worrying about it. So it's always there. Everybody has it to a lesser or greater degree. It's usually a symptom, quite often a symptom of something else. It's not actually a thing in itself, anxiety. It's a sort of general word that's bandied around, but it's usually accompanied with depression, OCD, phobias, PTSD, like the guy you just read out. But this can only be diagnosed by a doctor. Okay,
yes,
so
we should make the point here, we are not doctors.
No.
And we are not putting this podcast together to find any kind of solution, really. No. It is merely to bring the subject to the fore and to talk about our own personal experience of it, and hopefully open up a dialogue with perhaps people out there who are suffering from anxiety. And we're not just talking about sailing here, although obviously my situation is specific about being on the boat. But there's probably people out there who have their own anxieties about things outside of sailing.
Yeah, so it is a slightly overused word, but perhaps not when you consider how much there is around. And just be aware that if you think you've got a problem, go and see a doctor. Don't go online. Go and see the doctor and get some kind of analysis done.
Going online to do a bit of cursory research is okay, but just don't go down the YouTube rabbit hole if you're not careful. But I said, my situation is about sailing. I just wanted to quickly try and summarise Don Moore's comment.
Oh, read it, it's great.
Yeah. So Don sailed and raced open sloop Amigas for about 5 years, and he said the stiffer the breeze, the happier he was. And then he moved up to an 18-foot sloop-rigged day sailor, and so he continued. But it all ended with a traumatic event between Christmas and New Year when he lost his keel. The boat flipped upside down and started to sink. He was 4 miles from land with a brisk wind in an empty passage in 100 fathoms of water, and he found himself standing on the bottom of the hull waist deep in water. The boat was fully submerged, the mast was straight down in the water, the broken keel was hanging by broken bits of fiberglass. He was eventually rescued, and he wants to give a shout out to the fireboat Defiance, who actually helped him along with some fishermen. And he salvaged the boat, and he spent the next month getting the boat ready again. For the next year, repeatedly, I tried to get back into the groove, but whenever the breeze picked up, I experienced a severe anxiety attack which forced me to lower sail and motor back to the dock. The boat sat on its trailer in my backyard for another few years, and finally I sold it. He then purchased a smaller boat, which ended up being a little fishing motorboat. The anxiety never came back once he'd settled on the motorboat, but he still wished he could be under sail and happy again.
So there's a good example of someone who doesn't fit the stereotype, not young, not female, an older person. It tends to be, apparently recently, it's gaining momentum in the sort of 20-year-old bracket. So he doesn't fit that at all. And in fact, Melissa White, who wrote Sailing Scared, which is a wonderful piece that we were told by Bian of Totem to go and have a look at, and I will link it on our blog post and in YouTube. Really, really worth reading, because it's about specifically anxiety on sailboats, specifically cruises. She's very honest and open about what happened to her. She's a licensed psychotherapist, so she knows what she's talking about, and she specialises in anxiety and its management. So she says late onset anxiety can happen much later in life to people who've never suffered from anxiety or depression before. It can happen to anyone, and it happened to her, and she knows people who've got it in their 60s who've been very comfortable thinking that everything's fine, and then it gets them. So do read Melissa, I think she's important. She says also differentiating, this is where it comes for cruisers, very important, differentiating between anxiety and the rational fear is important. Because when anxiety hits, understanding that your internal state of excitement is out of sync with what is actually going on in your environment is an important first step to coping. So that's that muddy period of thinking, Christ, I've got a really big problem here, I need to solve it, into it becoming an irrationally large big problem.
Yes, so Don's example is not irrational fear,
yes,
because that was a genuinely traumatic experience.
So maybe that's a PTSD thing.
Yes, whereas Melissa's situation, she talks about how her husband said to her, we're going to dock at a particular marina, and it was just that word dock that triggered this anxiety. And in her case, much more irrational. And I think that's one of the things is rationalising, and this goes back to, just looking at people going through anxiety and thinking, just pull your socks up. Because when you look at a situation like that objectively, you can rationalise and you can compartmentalise. When you're actually in that situation yourself and you're going through that, I think she calls it brain fire.
She does, yeah.
And nothing is logical, and you can't see the wood for the trees, and it becomes very difficult to pull yourself away from that situation and to say, right, okay, hold on, let's put this in context here.
Easy to say now, isn't it?
Of course it is.
So you need to explain a little bit more about what happened to you. So it started in Gorontalo.
Yes, so halfway across the top of Sulawesi, and actually before I just say that, I'll try and be as quick as possible, but I think it's important to contextualise this situation, and that is we were stuck in Borneo in lockdown for 2 years.
Yes.
We were forced to stay in a marina and spent all our money staying in this marina. So we didn't have a lot of cash, and eventually we were forced to head south when we wanted to head north. And on top of all of this, all I wanted to do was to fly home and see my family, who had been going through their own trials and tribulations through lockdown, and I was desperate just to see them.
Yeah.
But I knew I had this 4,000 kilometre passage to get the boat safely before I could do this. So that was the context.
And we were surrounded by people who felt the same. We saw in lockdown people just literally crumbling in front of us, didn't we? It was happening all over the place.
Yeah. But the first trigger, so there were 3 main triggers over this long passage. And the first trigger was when we got to Gorontalo in the middle of Sulawesi on the north coast, and the engine cut out. And we were lucky that it cut out where it did, because had it have cut out literally a mile around the corner, we would have been screwed. But we were able to very slowly sail back to the anchorage. But the trigger was that I couldn't solve the problem. And I knew what the problem was, and I have fixed this problem in the past. But this time I wasn't able to. And that trigger was me berating myself for not fixing it, having to rely on someone else to fix it, and just being generally disappointed in my own abilities. And so I started thinking, well, what are you doing on a sailboat? If you can't fix this problem on your own, you shouldn't be on a sailboat. That was the internal dialogue going through my head.
That's actually important, the internal. You weren't telling this to me. I didn't know what was going on in your head. I just saw a grumpy, silent person who was getting on with getting us from A to B, not sharing any of it. And I wasn't aware at that stage, I have to say, that there was anything wrong. It took me a while for the penny to drop. Go on then.
But I was aware that this was going through my head. I remember quite clearly one morning in which there was good winds to sail, and I just didn't get the sails out. Ironically, I kept the engine on when the engine was the first trigger, but I just didn't get the sails out.
So,
I just kind of, I hadn't frozen, but I don't know what it was.
I described it as you losing your mojo. You were just too scared.
Yeah.
It felt to me like you were too scared to take what to me weren't even they weren't even chances. It's what we had always done.
And it wasn't like we were in 3-4 metre seas or anything like that. And this, so, you know, even my internal dialogue was in conflict with itself, because on the one hand I was trying to rationalise and compartmentalise, but on the other I was being completely irrational, and I was beating myself up about this as well. So that was the first trigger. And obviously, I guess, you know, depression and anxiety can go hand in hand, and I was starting to get a little bit depressed. The second trigger I don't really want to discuss in too much detail because it involves other people. But it was a situation in which a group of people we thought our friends started treating us like...
Yes, they weren't very kind to us.
Garbage.
No, they weren't kind. We don't know why.
Yeah, we've no idea why. I'm sure they have their reasons. There are always 2 sides to a story.
Yes. I'm not going to give anything away now. It's not fair. But what I do want to say is my reaction in that kind of situation is to completely withdraw from it and just get pissed off. I get angry. You get sad.
I get sad. I mean, it was just ridiculous. They were lying to us, and actually, you had picked up on it a couple of months previously. They were systematically ignoring every single communication from you. Anyway, we don't understand why, but it was just having now started slipping into this sort of slow depression, and then getting somewhere and thinking, oh, it'd be nice to see some friendly faces, and then just being treated like shit by these people. That just made me feel worse. But what the second trigger really was, me not sticking up for you when they were being particularly nasty to you, because they were, on two different occasions, they shouted at us for no reason.
I know.
And I should have stepped in and stuck up for you. And I started beating myself up about that as well. Not only was I starting to sort of get a bit depressed and crumbling internally, but I wasn't able to be there for you as well. So
Which you always have been, and it doesn't often happen. And anyone who's been watching these podcasts or anyone videos or knows me knows that I don't really need sticking up for, because I can give much better than I take. And if I see someone being a cunt, I'll tell them they're being a cunt. That will be bleeped. If you find this topic interesting and would like to continue the conversation, come and join the Follow the Boat Discord community. Look for the link in the description. It's free.
We then left and we were off on our merry way. And the third trigger was, and you're about to find this out in the weekly vlogs, the knocking sound, which I alluded to in the videos, in the weekly vlogs. And that's when, and that was more rational, because that I knew there was something majorly wrong with the boat.
Yeah. And we had a long way to go.
We had a long way to go. We had nowhere we could duck into. There was no wind, so if we lost the engine, we could sail somewhere. There was nowhere to anchor in an emergency because we're in 2 miles of water. So all of these things were contributing to this anxiety as well. And so all the while trying to race to get to Lombok, to get home, to see my family, but having to contend with these situations is, you know, it was a difficult situation.
I think it was by this stage the penny finally dropped with me, because you weren't eating. I kept trying to force you to eat, which just irritated you. You could see the weight falling off you. I'd realised what it was, and I realised there's nothing at all that I could do. Because you couldn't go and see anyone and have any, you know, talk to a doctor or anyone like that. You only had me to bounce anything off, and you were completely like a clam, wouldn't do it, wouldn't talk to me. And I tried to open you up a few times, and you just snapped.
I was horrible. I was nasty.
Yeah.
Nasty.
Don't feel guilty about it, because I knew that there was a problem. I knew that there was a big problem, and I knew in some ways that I would have to be the sponge just to accept it, because we'd wait until we'd get there and then things would get better. You needed to get to the UK. That's what I kept hanging on to. You need to get to the UK. You need to be with your family. You need to get away from this situation, get off the boat, then we can reassess. I mean, we did get to the point at one stage, I think by the time we got to our destination, well, you were almost saying, I've had enough, don't want to do this anymore.
Oh yes, and so we should make that point, because that's no secret.
Yeah.
As we were approaching Lombok, I think at that point I cried for the first time in about 5 years. I just broke down, and I said, that's it. I want to sell the boat. I've had enough. The one thing that saved me, I shan't mention their name, but when we got to Lombok, we bumped into someone that we had known for years. He was going through exactly the same thing. He had got to Lombok and his attitude was, what next? What's going to break next on the boat? I am fed up with this. And he had been sailing all his life and he was in the same situation. That actually made me feel a little bit better, that it wasn't just me, but there were other people going through this. And I'm happy to say both he and myself have continued and haven't sold the boat. But that's the stage it got to.
Yeah.
I just had enough. You may even notice on the videos that I perk up as soon as we haul out. I suddenly perk up again because I'd put behind that journey, that stress, that anxiety, and I knew, right, I'm now going to go back home and see my family.
Yeah, you felt safe because we were off the boat, and we had the plane tickets, we were going.
Yeah, and it was kind of, you know, removing myself from the situation that was causing me to be like this, and that is being on a boat that had issues in a place where I didn't feel safe and comfortable.
I'll be honest with everybody, we got to the stage, because you were so fed up with it all, that we started looking at selling the boat and buying a narrowboat and living in the UK.
We did.
I went really into the details of it and what life would be like on a narrowboat, watched lots of videos of people on them and did loads of research, and still quite like the idea, to be honest with you, because the thing I miss most, and this isn't anxiety, I have an underlying sadness that we no longer have Millie. And it's a constant sadness for me that we have no animal. I've never lived in my life without an animal of some kind.
Yeah.
And I'm finding it very difficult, which is why when we go ashore, I'm just all over dogs and cats, because I just desperately miss having a pet. But that's a different thing, and that's just sadness and slight depression.
Well, I'm your pet sometimes, aren't you? Just
Yeah.
treat me as your animal. I just wanted to read Michael Tillman's comment, who says, "You've made me very happy. I missed the video podcast so much, not just on video, of course, also audio. I can so easily lose myself in them." So do we, Michael. Sometimes we get completely lost and we don't even know where we're going. Anxiety seems to be a little bit of an epidemic. It affects me constantly, complete with a few panic attacks that honestly seem ridiculous even to myself after the fact. I certainly can't explain myself to even the few people I will talk to about it. Now, add to it your situation, nothing being certain, constantly working to comply with various governments, keeping up maintenance, keeping yourself fed. Let's not forget having been trapped in one place for how long again? During lockdown. It's a little surprising that you two still have your first knuckles, much less your fingernails. Anyway, thanks again for starting the podcast. I appreciate the distraction. Thank you, Michael. And that's you understand perfectly. And now you understand, of course, that I was biting my fingers almost down to the first knuckles.
I'd be interested to know if anybody had realised that there was a problem now that they've watched the videos, if they've worked out that there might have been a problem there.
Well, now American, our great friend American, who also commented on this subject, he makes adult plushes.
Yes.
Which are all named after, he calls them mental disorders, and his anxiety plush rabbit is his best selling. And by the way, he introduced all these during the pandemic, and all of these people are buying these soft toys as a kind of, you know, a
comfort thing.
Yeah, that's right. He got in touch and had noted that our videos seemed to be a bit more, and I can't remember the word, I think he said personal, or a bit more, not introverted, but he picked up on something.
Yeah, he's a good friend, knows you well.
True.
So it's reasonable that he should have done that. Yeah, so what were we talking
Did anyone
about?
notice?
Yeah.
We'd love to know if you noticed in the videos whether there was a change.
Yeah, and what was it that happened? I just want to go back to Michael's point about he appreciates the distraction. I think it actually works two ways, because I think one of the things that held you together throughout that journey was knowing that we were going to do the podcast, the videos, eventually podcast again. And it's surprising. You'd think that that would be something that would be one of the first things you'd get rid of. You'd think that it's going to be another terrible burden, but it's the opposite.
Yes, having a distraction distracts me from other things.
So concentrating on the filming, on the story, on showing people what we're seeing. And don't get us wrong, there's a lot of fantastic stuff we saw. I mean, there's all the diving for a start. There's Saddam Hussein. Loving it in Posi Lagoon. Some beautiful people we met along the way. So a lot of those, they're distractions, and filming them and talking about them and editing them, great way to pull you out of it, just for a moment.
I've always written a diary since I was 7, 8 years old. And the reason why I've done it is because I very quickly worked out from a young age, it allowed me to compartmentalise the day, what happened that day, compartmentalise it, contextualise everything that happened.
Rationalise
it, exactly, yes. And there is a little bit of that going on with the videos as well.
Yeah.
Do you like our coffee mugs? You can get your own from our shop. Find them at followtheboat.com/shop.
Do you think, having gone through what you went through, which is actually very easy to identify, it was a specific thing that happened at a specific time frame, do you think now that you've gone through it once that you'll know how to cope next time?
That's a very good question.
What would you change about your behaviour?
About my behaviour or the situation? Because I think it was the situation as much as anything. Knowing that we had a slightly broken boat didn't help. So if I could change anything, it would be to somehow guarantee that the boat was never going to break down.
That's never going to happen.
Exactly.
I mean, I said this to you at the time. We've been in much much more remote places, much scarier situations. When we went through the west coast of Sumatra, through all those islands, there's nothing there. There were plenty of islands with nobody on them. Certainly no one could have helped us with anything whatsoever, and yet we didn't worry about it.
I know.
And in Anambas, that's pretty remote. Some of the other islands we've been through have been very remote, nobody on them, and you know, that was normal. That's what we were doing all the time. So I don't think it's that. I think you're latching onto a practical concern, whereas I'm talking about more your mental and emotional response.
Well, but the other question is, have I compartmentalised this, and am I now over it?
Yeah, are you? What do you think?
I'm
Are
not-
there triggers? Sorry.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm really not sure. I'm certainly loving being here and relaxing and not feeling the pressure to move on every day, being in an anchorage where there's no swell. I'm loving it here. And every time I think about the next stage of our passage, I'm thinking, well, now we're going to be back to rocky, rolly anchorages, unpredictable weather, waking up at 3 in the morning with horrendous anchorages where we have to get out, blah, blah, blah. Do I want to go through all that again?
I think it's important to say to everybody who's thinking of doing this that is the reality of cruising. You see all the pretty stuff, but there's a hell of a lot of crap that goes on that you have to cope with all the time. And we've been doing that since 2006. We've been constantly dealing with some pretty nasty situations, some scary weather and some dangerous situations. It's always there. Is it that you're less prepared to have to cope with them now?
I'm not sure. And I said earlier about being more knowledgeable in these situations can actually make the situation worse, because ignorance is bliss. When I think back to when we first started, I think I said this before, we were getting 10 knots out of Esper easily because I'd just fling all the sails out. Mind you, we didn't have half the crap on board we have now. But you know, there was a kind of don't know any better. So you didn't have a problem putting yourselves in situations and not really understanding just how serious some of these situations are.
Yeah.
As I've got more experienced, having a better understanding of potentially not necessarily life-threatening situations, but situations which are going to make our lives very difficult and troublesome.
Yeah. And life-threatening some of the time.
And well, some of them are, yes.
Occasionally, not many, but they do happen. There are some very dangerous things that we've gone through. I don't know, I don't feel like that, weirdly. I'm a lot older than you. I don't have that. But then I'm not the skipper. I'm not the one that's supposed to know about the engine. I'll support you, but it's not the thing I carry.
I had an interesting chat with another person, and their partner was having similar issues, not just with anxiety, but just generally with the engine.
Right.
And somehow we were drawing comparisons between cooking and the engine.
Right. Okay.
I think we were jokingly saying it's my problem to deal with the engine and Liz's issue to deal with the cooking, or this person I was talking to there, they deal with the cooking. And I said, well, dealing with the engine is far worse. And it immediately said, absolutely no way. You know, cooking on board, especially for more than, you know, one person, can be demanding as well. And I wasn't belittling that. What I was trying to get across was that with cooking, it's a known entity. You know what food you have, you know when you're going to cook, you know how much gas or power you have for the food, you know where to source the food. So you're dealing with something on a regular basis that's routine. Dealing with the engine, however, is the opposite, because something will go wrong when you least expect it.
Yeah, but what people were saying to you is that you should be managing that every day.
Right.
It should be a maintenance,
Absolutely.
should be something you do. Like those of us who cook, we do it every day. And so we're constantly aware. I mean, I know everything that's in the fridge, but you don't. I know what's in all of the cupboards.
Yes, right. You are backing up my inner dialogue that's saying you should know this.
Right.
You should know engines. You should know how to solve these problems. And that is, I'm going back now to why I was berating myself, saying, well, if you can't, why are you on a boat? I should add, of course, that some of the problems you have with the engine cannot be solved while at anchor.
Yeah.
And you'll find out very shortly in our weekly vlogs that the problems we had with our boat, well, you have to take out the shaft, take off the prop, lift the engine up. There's a whole load of stuff there which was the cause of the problem, and to solve it required expert knowledge, it required tools we don't have on board, and most importantly, to be out the water and on the hard.
Which we were, and we got there, and it was all okay.
But I knew all this beforehand, while we are under passage and stuck in a situation which I cannot change. All I can do is try and get to the place we're going to haul out as quickly as possible to shorten the time that we're spending in between.
So the problem is not the boat, it's not the boat. I think what I'm trying to get you to say is it's not the boat, it's how you manage your expectations, it's how you manage how you feel about it. So you say to yourself, you know, I'm not telling you what to do, I'm just suggesting that rather than going into the anxiety problem of going over in your mind all the time, berating yourself, telling yourself off and going through all the problems that there are, not everything that can go wrong, and just going round and round and round in circles, that is the problem. It's not the boat that's the problem, it's the mind that's doing that to you, killing you. And so what I've learnt from what I've read about anxiety is you need to be able to step away from that and control the way you think about it.
You are falling into the trap of what we talked about earlier, where you are rationalising and advising on how to cope with the situation.
I'm not saying how you do that. I'm saying that's what needs to be done. This is what I read on the NHS website.
One of the, I think Melissa's article, she said, and I've read this in a number of places, to remove yourself from the situation. Well, of course, when you're on a boat, you can't necessarily remove yourself from the situation. But clearly, when we got to Madana Bay and hauled the boat out, I had removed myself from that situation, and you can see my spirits lift immediately.
And also in the UK, removing yourself completely from Southeast Asia, everything, our old way of life, everything.
So that's one of the problems, is that you cannot remove yourself from the situation if you're under passage or you are somewhere quite remote.
Do you think that, having gone through it, that you would be able to identify that that's what you're going through? Because one of the things they say is if you can identify it, you're halfway to dealing with it.
But that actually contributed to further anxiety, was because I was able to identify
that it was anxiety.
Yes, this wasn't complete. I wasn't full of blind irrational fear. I knew what was going on. I could see all of that, and I knew that I should be able to rationalise by using these tricks that you are suggesting and that we've read about, but couldn't. And didn't. Yeah.
So my question then is, what will happen next time?
I don't know. And there is still a little bit of trepidation.
Right. Yeah.
And I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
I really don't. And as I was just saying a moment ago, I'm quite happy to prolong our time here.
Yeah, well, we can do that because I love it here and there's so much to see. We don't need to be doing any big crossings or anything like that.
I think that's the other thing, is that, you know, that passage had to be done in a short space of time. I know, obviously over the vlogs, it's over many months, but you're seeing edited highlights of a few days at a time. But that was a kind of constant move. I hate that kind of cruising.
Yeah, and that we've never been like that, which is why it's taken us so long to get here, because we find somewhere we like it and we like to get to know it well. We're in the Gillies and on the southwest of Lombok, where we were last week, still the same place. Been to one of the other islands, been on shore, been around, looked at lots of stuff on Lombok. Still, we've only just touched the tip of the iceberg. There's no reason why we can't make this our base for another year. You know, we don't have to go anywhere. Especially if you think you're still vulnerable, and I think you're right. I think there are still signs that that you're finding it difficult to cope now and again. So, number one for me, how I deal with anxiety is to remove the problem. I've done that with 2 husbands.
I'm killed.
No, that's not. But you're not the problem. So the actual physical, the actual problem, and it might be, I mean, don't shy away from anything. It might be that we do go live on a narrowboat in the UK. We can still blog about it.
I did.
You can take lots of photos.
Do you know what's actually stopped me from going down that route
Yeah.
was how parochial that lifestyle would be.
Compared to what we're used to.
Yeah, and I did come back down to earth and realise what we are doing here. And this is the other issue, because I have this going on in my head as well, reminding me that what we are experiencing here, travelling to these wonderful places, you can put money on it, but you almost can't put money on it, because they're just life-changing, lifetime experiences. And to get rid of that would be awful. And that's the driving force behind my irrational approach to these situations, is to remind myself, yes, but look at what you are seeing. And I think that's how perhaps people looking at my situation and other people's situations objectively would be saying, but you're so lucky to be on the boat. You look at what you're experiencing.
Yeah, but as we've just demonstrated, it doesn't stop you being anxious or depressed or sad about stuff. We're all humans. So I wonder where that leaves us.
Did you know that liking and subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts helps us to get noticed? Go on, give us a helping hand.
We've still got some more comments
Yes,
that I think we should read out.
fire away.
Yeah, so which ones have
Okay, so we've got Amanda Dunstan, who's a Patreon. Thank you, Amanda. Who says she's really enjoying our channel. She's a weekend sailor, mainly solo. Good girl. And oh boy, do I get anxious. I'm trying to get the courage up to get out into the open sea. Anyway, I watch and dream with the channels I follow. Yeah. And I think hopefully that's more of a positive anxiety.
Yes.
That anxiety that you get, when everyone gets when you put yourself...
I think when they say positive anxiety, people mean adrenaline. The adrenaline starts to rush because, oh my God, it's scary. We've been in some scary situations where you just feel the adrenaline, you actually feel it in your body, and you get the serotonin rushing through, pushing you onto a high, and bang, you're off and you're doing it. But making the jump, that's the difficult thing.
It is.
Yeah.
It's good to hear that Amanda's actually, she's already sailing. She's just got to make that next leap. I mean, look, she's a solo sailor, mainly solo sailor. She says, that takes balls.
It does. Well done, Amanda. Keep it up. Now, I promised I would say his name to camera. This is a guy on Facebook whose name is Douwe.
Dowie?
So I said, how do you pronounce it? And he laughed because everybody gets it wrong. Anyway, I looked it up, and I'm going to say Douwe, as in... So it's actually like Douwe Egberts, the coffee. So he says it's got an at the end. So Douwe says,
Okay.
I got a question. How do you keep up with maintenance while you're in a remote areas with little or no way to get parts? Because not being able to fix mission important items would give me anxiety. There you go.
Yeah, that kind of relates to what we're talking about here. And you prepare yourself for as many eventualities as possible, and experience counts as well. But just being prepared for the unknown, that's both a positive challenge and can be a little bit scary as well.
And as we've demonstrated, it's a state of mind. There's only so much practically you can do. You do everything you think you can do, but you will forget to do some things. You get the boat equipped with what you think you can, everything you can, but then you have to take a leap of faith. You have to just go for it, and you have to have positive mental attitude, as they used to say in the olden days.
I haven't heard that for a while.
One of the things that I hold on to is that we're on a boat, and everywhere we go there are other boats, and all those boats are having problems. I can assure you, all these little local boats get problems all the time with their engines, their outboards and their sails and blah blah blah. You see them upside down sometimes, you see wrecks. Everybody has problems, from the biggest to the smallest, and everywhere you go there are places on land where they fix problems.
Yes.
It's unusual to be somewhere where you can't get a problem fixed. I mean, there is the famous story of the family that ended up in Chagos, where there is literally nothing, and they had parts brought to them across the water as people were going there.
And another Aussie family who ended up somewhere in the South Pacific, stuck on an island for almost a year.
Yeah.
Again, because they couldn't get parts. Their children ended up going to the local school where they spoke a completely different language, and the kids learnt a new language and they had a great time of it. I'm sure it would have been stressful at the time. In fact, I think they even wrote a book about it. But they just dealt with the situation.
Yeah.
Here we are, we're stuck on this island. We can't fix our boat. We're going to have to ship parts. That's going to take months.
What can we
Deal
do
with it.
about it? So it's really unusual that you'll be somewhere where there is absolutely nothing and no help at hand. And even if you think there isn't immediate help, there will be eventual help. As long as the boat is still floating, that you can collect rainwater and you've got food, you're all right. When you've got none of those things, then it's probably best to give up.
Yep.
Get out. Any more?
David Clark, I wanted to mention David's comment because he, not only did he say this, a lot of other people said this, and he also kind of reflects what I think. I think we can all get a bit anxious at one time or another, but I can tell you during lockdown, people like you and other channels were a godsend for giving me something to watch and talk about. This goes back to
True.
what you were saying about how actually making the videos helped us.
It did. It's a two-way thing.
Two-way thing.
Yeah.
And of course there were many channels we would watch during lockdown that we really appreciated
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. Not really sailing channels, let's be honest. We're both into the other stuff, but YouTube kept us going. I know a lot of sailors did have a hard time. A lot of cruisers gave up, but most of us carried on through. And there was some talk about whether actually being on a boat, being a cruiser, made you better equipped to deal with it.
Yes, we discussed that just with ourselves, I
Yeah.
think, and I remember talking to Bian about it as well. Initially, at the beginning of lockdown, I think we were all kind of almost arrogant about that
Yeah.
fact.
Oh,
that
this is the way we live. We're always on our own. We're
Yeah.
self-sufficient. We'll be all right.
the practicalities of that self-sufficiency, sure. What we hadn't taken into consideration were the psychological
Yeah.
effects.
How
of that.
smug we were. You need people. You need.
Talking of the pandemic, Rosie Landon.
Yeah, I like
Says,
Rosie.
great to see you guys come back with the podcast. I always look forward to them. Thank you, Rosie. As for the discussion on anxiety, at the end, think the pandemic had been incredibly divisive between people, which has overall contributed to the rise in mental health issues. Exactly that.
Mm-hmm.
Waiting for you to come in with another comment?
Well, she says, as for anxiety specifically, I think one of the biggest issues is that the line of things you can control and the things that you can't has become blurred. So people are worrying and becoming anxious more and more about things that are completely out of their control and they have no say over. That is the point that I liked about her thing.
Sorry, I didn't have that there.
You didn't take the whole thing.
No.
Well, because the whole point of that was that we do need to feel in control. Some of us are more control freaks than others, but when you, particularly if you are a control freak, if you lose control, it really upsets you, really knocks you out of kilter and can cause all kinds of problems. I know that from my own point of view.
Maybe that's the problem I was having.
Yeah, I think it was, personally. But I'm not a doctor, I can't diagnose it, but that was certainly what we could see, wasn't it?
Yep. Just going to drop the window a second. There's a bit of a breeze coming through.
It's nice, this breeze, I love it. Yeah, so it was quite a lot. Oh, it was somehow you missed that part of her.
Yeah, sorry about that, Rosie.
Yeah. Yeah. So that loss of control, massively important, especially for cruisers. We're really big control freaks. We control everything, and even the weather, which we can't control, we know how to use it.
Yeah.
You know, and where and what it means and what we should do because of it. So
That's a good point. I've never seen myself as a control freak. Am I a control freak? Yes. Am I?
Yeah.
It's something I've never really given much thought to. Maybe that's why I quit drinking, because I felt that I was losing control a little bit.
Sorry for interrupting, but while I've got you here, if you like what we do and you want to support us and become a Patreon, or join us on FTB Mates, or even drop a quid in the rum fund, go to followtheboat.com/pub. Of course, come to the pub.
So next week's is going to be all about drinking on boats. Fair enough?
Sounds good.
Anything
Yeah,
else to add?
I think that'll be a fun one. I'm sure lots of people will have lots of comments. Don't forget, leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube, leave it under there. Twitter, just tag us at followtheboat. And don't forget, we've got Discord as well, where we've been reading out some of the comments. All the links will be somewhere down below or
Yes, if you're
underneath
watching.
or
if you're watching on YouTube, look at the description. I'll link everything I can possibly do.
And
But
Spotify
also-
as well, we can do as well.
Oh, can we?
Yes.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
So it'll be on the blog post as well, in our blog. So on that subject,
Well, that
all
was-
I can say is cheers.
Yes, that was quite heavy, that. But it's quite therapeutic for me to talk about it.
Actually, yeah, before we go, I think... No, I won't. That's right.
What were you going to
Stop
say?
it, stop it there.
Go on.
Because I forgot halfway through what I was going to say.
You twat.
Oh, no, I know what I was going to say. I was going to
Go
say
on.
that we never plan these. That we have a few bullet points
Yes.
and we print out the questions.
Yes.
We never plan how we're going to do it. And I have an idea in my head of where I want to go, and you have another idea.
I know. And that can be quite frustrating because you're going in one direction and I'm going in the other direction. But it's good to have a few bullet points, and I just wish we had more time to read everyone's comments in full, but we just can't.
We do read them, we don't always read them out. So peace and farewell.
We'll stop it there.
We'll stop it there.